What if the most beloved hero in the entire galaxy, the single person responsible for 9 centuries of peace, was just executed on a live feed for trillions to see? That's not a hypothetical. It just happened. And if you think you know where this story is going, trust me, you don't. The empire that pulled the trigger made one tiny, catastrophic mistake, and it was about to burn their entire civilization to the ground. This all kicked off on Concordia Prime, a magnificent space station that had served as the beacon of galactic harmony for nearly 1,000 years. Inside her suite, General Amara Chen, a 63-year-old peacekeeper from Earth, gazed out at the star-dusted blackness. She was a living legend, a woman whose face was lined with kindness, her dark hair streaked with silver, who carried herself with an easy, unbreakable dignity. This was the woman who single-handedly negotiated the end of 17 savage wars, using nothing but the calm, reasonable power of her words. She was the reason the galaxy was on the verge of celebrating the 900th anniversary of the Great Peace. To countless beings across the stars, she wasn't just a diplomat. She was the living embodiment of peace itself. A gentle rap on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Mom," a voice she knew better than her own name called out, "it's about that time." Amara's professional focus melted away, replaced by a mother's warm smile as she opened the door for her son, Admiral James Chen. In his crisp naval uniform, he looked so much like his father it sometimes made her heart ache. "You look a little wound up," Amara said softly, seeing the familiar flicker of anxiety in his eyes. "Well, you're about to give a speech to 10,000 different species, Mom," James shot back with a half-smile. "Somebody has to be the nervous one." She chuckled, a low, comforting sound. "I think I've done this once or twice before." "Not like this," he insisted. 900 years, the entire galaxy is tuned in." She reached out, her hand resting on his cheek. "Then let's make sure it's a day they'll remember forever." As they moved through the station's grand corridors, delegates from 1,000 different star systems moved aside, offering bows and nods in a silent, universal show of respect. The hallways were a vibrant, flowing tapestry of life, beings with 6 limbs, 2 limbs, or no limbs at all, some encased in personal atmosphere suits, others breathing the same circulated air. It was a perfect snapshot of the peaceful, unified world Amara had dedicated her life to building. The Grand Assembly Hall was a marvel, a massive dome with seating for 50,000, and every single seat was filled. Swarms of tiny camera drones hovered like fireflies, broadcasting the event across the light years to trillions more. In the very front row sat representatives from the 5 great galactic powers, the 4-armed and reptilian Krayali, the hive-minded Vorn Collective, the graceful, silver-skinned Salaran Federation, and the colossal, stone-like beings of the Morak Dominion. And sitting right in the center, radiating an almost suffocating air of superiority, were the Zarathayans. As the oldest and most powerful empire in the galaxy, they carried themselves as the unquestioned masters of the cosmos. Their leader, High Archon Velketh, was draped in robes of imperial purple and gold. His species looked almost human, but they were taller, with skin the color of a winter dawn, and eyes as cold and empty as deep space. The Zarathayans were already conquering worlds when humanity was still learning how to forge iron. Amara stepped up to the podium, the gravity of 9 centuries settling on her shoulders as she began her address. "My friends," she began, her voice infused with a genuine warmth that seemed to embrace every soul in the hall. "We gather today to honor something truly rare. We are here to honor peace." Her words painted a picture of the galaxy's darkest days, of the brutal wars that had left their mark on every soul in the room. She celebrated the wisdom of the ancestors who chose to build bridges between stars instead of burning them. For 900 years, she proclaimed, her voice vibrating with conviction, we have proven to the entire universe that we are far more powerful together than we could ever be apart. But High Archon Velketh heard none of it. His mind was drifting back to a simpler time when humans were little more than chattering beasts on a forgotten mud ball of a planet. He didn't see partners in this grand alliance. He saw an infestation, a weed growing wild and choking out the garden. In the galactic blink of an eye, just 9 centuries, humanity had gone from being the new kids on the block to indispensable leaders. They excelled at everything they touched: science, diplomacy, art, and commerce. Their sphere of influence was expanding with the speed of a supernova. Velketh saw where this was headed. He had told his council that if they didn't do something drastic, humanity would inevitably surpass them. The ancient empires would be reduced to a footnote in history books written by human hands. And so, they came up with a plan, a shockingly simple and brutal plan to cut the upstarts down to size. At the exact moment Amara was describing a hopeful future for all of them, Velketh gave a nearly imperceptible nod. One of his royal guards, a weapon hidden in the folds of his ceremonial robe, took aim. There was no bang, no flash, just a silent, razor-thin beam of energy that crossed the distance in an instant. The beam hit General Chen square in the chest. For one surreal, terrifying second, time itself seemed to stop. Amara looked down, a look of utter confusion on her face as a dark crimson stain bloomed across her white dress uniform. Her eyes scanned the crowd, desperately trying to find her son, who was already bolting towards her, before they found the cameras, broadcasting her last breath to the entire galaxy. "Remember," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Remember what we are." And then she was gone, collapsing to the floor. The hall exploded into sheer pandemonium. Screams ripped through the air as security forces swarmed the Zarathaean delegation, who had already locked into a defensive formation around their Archon. James skidded to his mother's side, his hands fumbling to stop the bleeding that wouldn't stop. He watched the light go out of her eyes and knew, with a certainty that hollowed him out, that she was gone. "Stay with me," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Mom, please, just stay with me." Through all the chaos, High Archon Velketh stood perfectly still, completely composed. He had anticipated some shouting, maybe a clumsy charge from the humans. All he saw was weakness and sorrow. "This woman was a danger to galactic stability," Velketh's voice boomed, cutting through the noise for a split second. "The Zarathaean Empire has acted to protect you all from her clandestine terrorist network." It was a lie so audacious, so profoundly insulting, that it was almost a masterpiece. Before his words could even register, the entire Zarathaean delegation dissolved in a flash of blinding light, teleporting directly to their warships hidden in high orbit. A heartbeat later, their fleet tore open a rift in space-time and vanished. Admiral James Chen was left kneeling on the stage, alone in a spreading pool of his own mother's blood. Medics finally broke through the frantic crowd and carried Amara away, leaving James with a frozen emptiness in his chest that was already beginning to crystallize into something hard and dangerous. The other delegates were losing their minds. Some were demanding an immediate declaration of war. Others were begging for restraint. But James was deaf to it all. He moved like a phantom through the chaos, his mind a quiet, deadly storm. He made his way to the command deck of his personal flagship, a vessel ironically named the UEES Vengeance. In the cold, dark silence of his private quarters, he thought about his mother's life's work, 9 centuries of peace, shattered by one act of supreme cowardice. He thought about the boundless arrogance of the Zarathaeans, and then he opened a top-secret, heavily encrypted channel to every single ship in the entire human fleet. His face, now a mask of cold fury, appeared on thousands of view screens. "This is Admiral Chen," he said, his voice flat and lethal. You have all witnessed the events of the last hour. General Amara Chen, my mother, has been assassinated by the Zarathian Empire during a summit on peace. He let the weight of that statement sink in. 900 years ago, humanity swore an oath to this galaxy. We promised to be the keepers of the peace, and for 9 centuries we honored that vow. His eyes, which had always held his mother's warmth, were now filled with a terrifying darkness. Relay the signal to all battle groups. Execute Condition Omega, he ordered. The old empires have forgotten the real reason the treaty was ever signed. I think it's time we gave them a little reminder. The channel cut out. Across all of human-controlled space, on hundreds of worlds and thousands of starships, ancient alarms that had been dormant for centuries began to shriek. A war machine that had slept for 900 years had just been kicked awake. The Zarathians thought they were brilliant. They assumed that by killing the symbol of peace, they would break humanity's spirit and send them scurrying back into the shadows. They had no idea they hadn't just murdered a peacekeeper. They had just unleashed the very monster she had spent her life keeping on a leash. The broadcast of the assassination spread like a virus. Everyone watched it, again and again. Amara's final words, "Remember what we are," became a haunting riddle. But as human warships began to mobilize with a speed and ruthless efficiency that shocked the rest of the galaxy, everyone was about to get the answer. The peace was broken. The universe was about to receive a history lesson it would never be able to forget. He fed them a story, claiming that humanity's growth was a cancer on the otherwise perfect garden of the galaxy. He swore on his honor that the humans were secretly planning to violate the treaty, and that his noble Zarathian empire had only acted in preemptive self-defense. He told the other great powers to either support him or stay out of his way, because everyone knew these human upstarts were far too young and weak to fight a real war. Have you ever seen someone so arrogant, so sure they're going to win, that you just know they're about to make the biggest mistake of their lives? Stick around, because this is a story all about that. They've grown soft, declared Archon Velketh to his war council. These humans have forgotten what a real war is. The second they see our armada, they'll surrender. It's in their nature. His advisors nodded like puppets on a string. After all, the Zarathian Empire had a fleet 50 times the size of Earth's. Their technology was legendary, and they had conquered 100 worlds before humans even knew how to melt iron. But thousands of light years away, not everyone was so confident. In a library filled with towering stacks of ancient books and data chips, Ambassador Varmoth of the Kree Alley was trembling. All 4 of his hands shook as he cracked open classified files that hadn't been seen in 900 years. Files that told a story so different from the official version, it was downright terrifying. If you looked in any public archive, you'd read that the galactic peace was a generous gift from the older, wiser races to the younger ones. It was a way for species like humans to join the galactic community without getting hurt. The official story says humans were thankful, humble, and just happy to be included. That official story was a complete lie. Varmoth knew the truth because he was a junior diplomat when that so-called gift was signed. As he scanned the old reports, the memories hit him like a tidal wave. 900 years ago, humanity wasn't part of some big, happy family. His people, the Kree, found them first, a scrappy, primitive species just starting to explore their own solar system. The Kree saw them as an easy target, a simple race to conquer and enslave. It was the single greatest miscalculation in galactic history. The Kree invasion of Earth was over in 3 days. When the dust settled, half of their mighty fleet was just a cloud of glittering space debris. Humans hit them back with things they were totally unprepared for: nuclear weapons, chemical agents, and plagues engineered just for them. They turned their own planet into a fortress, Their sheer, brutal ferocity sent shockwaves across the galaxy, and that was just the beginning. The terrified Creali called for help, and 11 other species joined the fight against this one little planet. The powerful Vaughn Collective, the brilliant Silurians, the giant Morak, even the arrogant Zaratheans. It was 12 advanced civilizations against a single world. It should have been a massacre. And it was. Just not for the humans. You see, humans learn terrifyingly fast. Every weapon used against them was analyzed, copied, and improved. Every strategy they faced was picked apart and turned back against them. They brought advanced starships, so the humans captured them and reverse-engineered the technology in a few weeks. They took the galaxy's shiniest toys and made them their own. In less than 5 years, humanity wasn't just defending their home anymore. They were attacking. Human ships started appearing in star systems light years away, shattering supply lines and military bases. They even started freeing other species that the 12 powers had enslaved for centuries. The war dragged on for 20 brutal years. By the end, the great powers weren't trying to conquer humanity, they were desperately trying to survive. Varmoth could never forget their final stand. The human fleet appeared over the Creali homeworld, so many ships they literally blocked out the stars. They had enough power to turn the whole planet into ash, but they waited. Instead, a human general broadcast a single simple message to every living being below. We never asked for this war. You brought it to us. Now you have a choice, peace or total annihilation. You have 1 hour to decide. The Creali chose peace. So did the other 11. The galactic peace wasn't created by the wisdom of elder races. It was created by the mercy of humanity. Varmoth slammed the historical files shut and stood up. He marched to his communications console and sent a top priority message, not to his own leaders, but straight to the Zarathian Archon. "Hello, Archon Velketh," he began, his voice thick with the shame of 9 centuries. "You fools, you absolute galaxy-dooming fools. You just killed the one person who was holding them back." Similar scenes were unfolding across the galaxy, as old buried memories began to surface. On the Vaughn Central World, millions of bodies froze as their hive mind accessed its deepest, most terrifying archives, memories of human soldiers who kept fighting after being torn apart, and human scientists cracking codes that had been unbreakable for thousands of years. But there were other memories too, memories of human kindness, of them releasing prisoners of war and treating their enemies' wounds. The collective remembered the fear, a deep-seated terror of a species that seemed to have no limits. On the Morak homeworld, ancient warriors gathered in great halls to speak of the battles their grandfathers had fought. The Morak were the biggest, strongest species in the known galaxy, and they prided themselves on fearing nothing. But the stories their elders told about humans made the young ones shiver. "They just don't stop," the old warriors would say. "You can break their bones, but you can never break their spirit. They either fight to win, or they fight until every last one of them is gone. And even then their children remember, and their children will come for you." The Silurians, who considered themselves the smartest species, had tried to analyze humans to find their secret. What they found was chilling. Humans were a threat because they could be anything they needed to be. They could be kind and they could be savage. They could be patient and they could be reckless. They were logical and emotional at the same time. They adapted to absolutely everything. They used every tool at their disposal. And they never, ever gave up. On 1,000 different worlds, beings who had only known peace their whole lives felt a cold, ancient fear stirring inside them. Their parents had told them stories. Their grandparents had the scars to prove those stories were real. The galaxy had spent 900 years trying its very best to forget what humanity was really capable of. Now, it was all coming back in a terrifying rush. And then, something strange happened. Human space went completely dark. It began on the borders. Communication relays just blinked off. Cargo ships suddenly changed course and sped back home. Warships vanished from their patrol routes. Within 2 days, not a single signal was coming out of human territory. No ships went in, and none came out. The Zarathaians thought it was hysterical. "They're running scared," Velketh laughed to his council. "They know they've lost, so they're hiding like cowards. Soon they'll send a diplomat begging for mercy." But the older races weren't laughing at all. The Cathali ambassador sent a private message to his government. "They are not hiding. They are preparing. I have seen this before. We all have. The humans always go silent right before they attack. They gather their strength. They finalize their plans. And when they emerge—" He didn't have to finish the sentence. On the capital station, Concordia Prime, the other delegations were in a total panic, desperately trying to figure out what to do. Some wanted to side with the Zarathaians. "The humans are a danger," they argued. "Maybe it's better to put them down now, before they get any stronger." Others begged to stay out of it. It was a fight between humans and Zarathaians, so why should they get involved? But the Cathali ambassador stood up and shut down both arguments. He stood before the whole assembly, feeling the incredible weight of history on his shoulders. "I was there," he said, his voice quiet but steady. 900 years ago. I was at the signing of that treaty. We didn't sign it out of kindness. We signed it because we were absolutely terrified. We begged the humans to stop. We offered them anything they wanted if they would just end the war." He looked around at the faces of the delegates. General Chen wasn't just a diplomat. She was a living symbol. She represented everything humanity chose to be instead of what they could have been. She was their promise to all of us that they would always choose peace. His voice dropped to a whisper. "And you shot her." He locked eyes with the Soluran delegation. "Your grandparents firebombed human cities from orbit, and the humans forgave you." He turned to the Morak. "Your ancestors enslaved entire human colonies. The humans freed themselves and still offered you a seat at the table." He then looked toward the empty seats of the Zarathaian delegation. "And now you have murdered the one woman who spent her life convincing her people to be gentle. You have just reminded them of every single crime we ever committed against them. You have woken up a monster that should have been left sleeping forever." The room was dead silent. What are they going to do?" someone finally asked. Varmuth closed his eyes. "They will come, and they will remind all of us, once again, why we were so afraid in the first place." Deep within human space, in secret shipyards hidden from every spy in the galaxy, ancient machines roared back to life. For 900 years, humanity had been the galaxy's quiet neighbor. But now, weapons sealed away for centuries were waking up. Soldiers were opening orders passed down from one generation to the next. The humans were done hiding. It was time to get up. Far beneath the red dust of Mars, in secret tunnels no alien had ever found, lights blinked on for the first time in almost 1,000 years. Machines that had been silent since before humanity ever touched the stars began to hum with a terrifying kind of power. Dust rained from metal plates as ancient computers finished their self-checks, flashing green one by one. All systems were perfect. Commander Sarah Park walked through the tunnels, her heart pounding with the weight of a sacred duty. She had known her whole life this place was real. Every human soldier did. But knowing and actually seeing it were two very different things. "How long has all this been down here?" her Lieutenant Cole whispered, his voice full of awe as he kept pace with her. "Since before the treaty was even a thought," Sarah said. "Our ancestors built it. Theirs kept it running, and every single generation since then has added to it, making it even better. They stepped out into a massive cavern, one so big it could have swallowed a city whole. As far as the eye could see, warships hung in the darkness like sleeping giants, ready to launch. These weren't the friendly cargo ships the galaxy knew. These were predators, built for one purpose: to fight. "The Zirathians think we have 3,000 ships," Sarah said, a cold smile on her face. "They think they outnumber us 50 to 1. She gestured at the silent waiting fleet. "They're about to fail the galaxy's biggest math test." And it was the exact same story playing out across every human world. On Earth, giant vaults that had been locked when the first treaty was signed were finally groaning open. For 900 years, the locks on these vaults were cared for by a secret order. Their only job was to get ready for a day they prayed would never come. Standing inside one of those vaults, Admiral James Chen looked at weapons that made his own modern fleet seem like toys, gadgets that could literally tear holes in the fabric of space. He saw shields that got stronger the more you hit them, and warships with engines that simply ignored the laws of physics as everyone knew them. 900 years, he whispered to himself. For 900 years we hoped we would never have to open this door. Next to him, his top scientist, Dr. Emily Vance, nodded grimly. "Your ancestors were smart, Admiral. They knew that peace is a fragile thing. They knew that someone, someday, would forget that lesson. So every generation prepared," Emily went on, her voice soft. "Your mother was part of this. She gave her whole life to making sure we'd never need any of it." She paused and looked him in the eye. "But she also made damn sure it would all work perfectly if we did." James nodded, a cold feeling sinking into his stomach. Just an hour ago he'd gotten the news. His mother was alive. The doctors had pulled her back from the edge. She was in a medically induced coma while her body healed, but she was going to pull through. And he made a silent promise that when she woke up, he would be able to tell her that the danger was over and that her life's work for peace could go on. All across the planet, the people of Earth began to prepare with a strange, quiet calm. There was no panic, no running in the streets. Every family knew exactly what to do. Every child had learned the safety drills from the time they could walk. The Galactic Treaty said humanity had to give up its weapons and forget how to wage war. Humanity agreed to be peaceful, but they never, ever agreed to be helpless. And there's a world of difference. Old veterans came out of quiet retirements, men and women from peacekeeping forces who had spent their lives training for a war that never happened. They put on uniforms that had been kept in perfect condition for decades and reported to command centers they had only ever visited in simulations. The next generation stood right beside them, kids who grew up hearing stories of the First Contact War, who defended Earth in video games, and who always had a feeling, deep down, that this day wasn't just a possibility, but a certainty. In schools all over human space, teachers stopped their lessons. "The peace has been broken," they told their students. "But you know our way. We only fight when we are left with no other choice, and we always remember that our enemies are people too." The students listened with serious faces. They understood. They always had. This was the burden and the honor of being human, to work tirelessly for peace while staying forever ready for war, to be gentle by choice but terrifying when pushed. On the colony of New Singapore, Governor Marcus Webb stood in front of his people. "The Zirathians think they know us," he shouted, his voice ringing with confidence. "They remember the scared, clumsy species that was just learning to travel between the stars. They have no idea what we are now." He held up a hand showing a long silver scar that ran across his palm. "My grandfather gave me this, a permanent reminder of what our people survived, a reminder to never be caught unprepared again." His voice grew thick with determination. We are not a weak people. We were never weak. We chose peace. Now, someone has taken that choice away from us, and the rest of the galaxy is about to see what happens when you back something into a corner that just wanted to be left alone. High above Earth, Admiral Chen walked onto the bridge of his flagship, the UES Vengeance. It was a state-of-the-art warship built in the last 10 years, the pride of humanity's public fleet. But it was not going to be fighting by itself. All around it, ghost ships shimmered into view, from secret bases in moon craters, from hollowed-out asteroids, from forgotten corners of deep space no one ever bothered to check. The old fleet had come back. These were the ships built in the dark ages after the First War, secretly maintained and upgraded by every generation, waiting for the day they would be needed again. The Xyrathians bragged about their fleet of 50,000 warships. Their spies told them humanity had at most 3,000. The real number was 30,000. And every last human ship was generations more advanced than anything the Xyrathians could even imagine. James Chen looked at the tactical map in his command center as his officers worked with the calm, quiet focus of true professionals. There was no excitement in the room, no hunger for a fight. There was only the heavy feeling of responsibility. "Admiral," his communications officer said, "the other galactic powers are contacting us. They're demanding to know what we're going to do." "Let them wonder," James said, his eyes glued to the map. "They had their chance to prevent this. They did nothing." "Sir, the Chrythali ambassador is on a secure channel. He says it's urgent." James considered it for a second, then gave a small nod. The ancient wrinkled face of the Chrythali ambassador, Varmov, appeared on the screen. He looked tired, heartbroken, and very, very scared. "Admiral Chen," Varmov started, "you must hear me out." "I'm listening." "I was there. 900 years ago. I saw what your people could do, and I saw what we did to make you that way." The ambassador's voice shook with a guilt that was centuries old. "I'm sorry. I've been sorry for every single day of my very long life. When the treaty was signed, I promised I would spend the rest of my days making sure it was respected." James didn't say a word, his expression impossible to read. The Xyrathians, they did this on their own. Many of us on the council argued against it. We failed. Varmov leaned in, his eyes pleading. "But please, Admiral, I am begging you. Remember the lessons your mother taught the galaxy. Revenge is not the same as justice. Don't make innocent people pay for the crimes of the guilty." For a long, tense moment, James just stared. Then he finally spoke. "Ambassador, do you know the last thing my mother told me before she went to that peace conference?" "No." "She told me that peace isn't just about not having a war. It is the active choice to fix problems without fighting. She said we must always offer that choice first, even to an enemy who doesn't deserve it." A little bit of hope sparked in Varmov's eyes. "The Xyrathian leadership will be offered that choice," James continued, his voice turning to ice. "We will not attack their civilians. We will not destroy their worlds. We will go straight to their high command, and we will offer them one chance to surrender, stand trial, and pay for what they've done." He leaned closer, his stare as sharp as a knife. "But if they turn down that offer, Ambassador, then we will surgically take apart their entire empire. And there isn't a single power in this galaxy that can do a thing to stop us." The connection ended. Admiral Chen turned to his crew. "Send the signal to the fleet. We move in 6 hours." "And the other powers, sir?" his executive officer asked. "Do you think they'll try to get in our way?" "They remember," James said simply. "They remember what we are. They won't interfere." And he was right. Across the galaxy, the major governments watched in shocked silence as the human fleet assembled. They saw more ships than they ever thought possible, carrying weapons they couldn't understand, moving with technology that seemed like magic. The math-obsessed Vaughn Collective ran the numbers on joining a war against the human fleet. The calculation was immediate. The result? A 100% chance of complete and total annihilation. It was a mathematical fact. They were staying out of it. The terrifying Marak War Council debated for less than 60 seconds. Their ancestors had passed down one simple rule through the ages. You never, ever start a fight with humans. They were staying out of it too. Every species that remembered the First Contact War, the Silurians, the Cathali, all of them, came to the same terrified conclusion. This was a family feud between humanity and the Xyrathians, and no one in their right mind was about to step into the middle of that blaze. Aboard his command ship, Admiral Chen stood before his officers. Behind him, the familiar stars of home glittered like diamonds on black velvet. 900 years ago, he said, his voice cold as the void itself. Our ancestors taught this galaxy to fear us. Today, we're going to issue a reminder. He turned to the main screen where the enemy was waiting in the darkness. All ships, execute jump. We're going to war. In an instant, 30,000 points of light flared and then vanished, leaving nothing behind but the ghost of the most powerful fleet the galaxy had ever known. The sleeping giant was awake, and it was pissed. From the bridge of his own flagship, the Imperial Majesty, High Archon Velketh, watched his armada with a self-satisfied smirk. Spread before him was the awesome power of the Xyrathian Empire, 50,000 warships arranged in flawless, deadly lines, ready to defend the honor of their empire. The humans are inbound, his tactical officer reported. Long-range sensors show roughly 30,000 ships. Velketh's smirk widened into a grin. 30,000? It was more than they'd anticipated, but they still had the numbers. And everyone knew Xyrathian ships were superior, their crews battle-hardened, and their tactics perfected over 10,000 years of conquest. They're flying straight into their own grave, Velketh chuckled. Let them. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace with chilling precision, materializing just at the edge of the Xyrathian formation. For a few tense, silent heartbeats, the two fleets faced each other in the dark. Thousands of ships, shields shimmering, weapons humming with deadly energy. Admiral Chen gazed at the enemy fleet and felt a profound calm. There was no fear, no doubt, only the ice-cold certainty that he would finish what the Xyrathians had been foolish enough to start. Open a channel, he ordered. All frequencies. I want every last one of them to hear me. His officer nodded. Channel is hot, sir. To the Xyrathian fleet, this is Admiral James Chen of the United Earth Navy. Your government committed an act of war when it tried to assassinate General Amara Chen during peace talks. To High Archon Velketh and every officer behind this cowardly plot, you will surrender yourselves unconditionally. You have 1 hour. Refuse, and we will cut a path right through your fleet to get to you. When the message reached Velketh, he leaned back and roared with laughter. It was a deep, arrogant sound that filled the bridge, and his officers, desperate to please, joined in with nervous chuckles. The audacity, Velketh boomed. Can you believe the sheer, breathtaking nerve of these little creatures? They are outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched in every way, yet they demand we surrender? He keyed his own comms. Human fleet, this is High Archon Velketh. It seems your forgotten little species needs a lesson in who runs this galaxy. Today, you get that lesson. We will tear your fleet to scrap, we will turn your worlds to glass, and your children will grow up learning how to kneel to their masters. He killed the channel and turned to his officer. All ships full assault. I want nothing left of them but atoms. 50,000 Xyrathian warships surged forward, a tidal wave of metal and hate ready to crash down on the human line. Admiral Chen watched them come, his face a mask of stone. Around him, his crew was coiled tight, their knuckles white on their consoles. They had trained for this day their whole lives, but a simulator could never prepare you for the real thing. The Admiral's weapons officer leaned forward, his voice strained. "Sir, the enemy is entering optimal firing range for our main batteries." "Hold," the Admiral said, his voice unshakable. "Let them get a little closer." The Zeratheans, blinded by centuries of arrogance, charged ahead. On thousands of bridges, weapons whined to full power and targeting locks painted the human ships. And then their commanders gave the order that sealed their fate: fire. The first volley was a horrifying sight. A blinding storm of energy bolts and missiles ripped across the void, aimed straight at the human formation. It should have been a slaughter, a single devastating blow that shattered dozens of ships. But it wasn't. The entire wave of destruction hit nothing but empty space. The human ships were moving in ways the Zeratheans couldn't comprehend, flowing around the battlefield like smoke. Their drives were bending physics in a way that Zerathean scientists would later call impossible. Not one shot connected. Before the enemy could even process what happened, the humans fired back. The first Zerathean ship to die was a massive battlecruiser, the Eternal Glory. One moment, it was a mountain of steel. The next, it was just gone. No explosion, no debris field. Not a single scrap of metal. It simply ceased to exist. Then another ship vanished. And another. On the bridge of the Imperial Majesty, Velketh stared at his tactical display, his brain refusing to understand what his eyes were seeing. "What is happening?" he shrieked. "What kind of weapons are those?" No one could answer. No one had ever seen anything like it. The human fleet moved through the Zerathean lines like a scalpel. Their ships danced with a terrifying silent grace, moving as one. Their weapons struck with absolute precision, deleting warships from reality while carefully and deliberately leaving supply freighters and medical transports completely unharmed. Zerathean commanders panicked. They ordered desperate maneuvers, tried new formations, and screamed for backup. It was pointless. Every tactic they tried, the humans had already countered. Every trap they set, the humans sidestepped with impossible ease. Every advantage they had relied on for centuries, the humans turned into a deadly weakness. "Retreat!" Velketh finally screamed, his voice breaking in sheer terror. "All ships, fall back!" But there was nowhere left to run. In the blink of an eye, human ships materialized directly behind the Zerathean fleet, slamming the door on any hope of escape. They were above, below, and on all sides, trapping the once mighty armada in a perfect cage. The hunter was now the prey. The entire battle was over in just 6 hours. When the silence fell, the Zerathean fleet was gone. Not defeated, not scattered, annihilated. 50,000 warships were now a massive silent graveyard. And the human losses? Only 147 ships. Across the galaxy, civilizations watched the live feeds in stunned silence. They saw the most feared military in history erased like a bad dream. They saw human ships performing maneuvers that broke the laws of physics. What they saw was the beautiful, terrifying result of a species that had been quietly preparing for this day for 900 years. But the Zerathean Empire wasn't conquered. The humans didn't occupy planets or enslave anyone. Instead, their fleet moved deeper into enemy space, striking only military installations. Supply depots were vaporized. Orbital fortresses went dark. Key government buildings were blockaded, but not a single civilian was harmed. On the Zerathean worlds, human soldiers landed. They didn't come with weapons raised. They set up public information centers and broadcast one simple message in every local dialect. We are not at war with the people of the Zyrthian Empire. We are here for the leaders who tried to murder our mother. Stay out of our way and you will be safe. Help us find them, and this will be over quickly." The Zyrthian people had braced for monsters. Instead, they got soldiers sharing their rations with hungry kids, medics treating the wounded on both sides, and officers who sincerely apologized for the inconvenience and promised to leave as soon as justice was served. This quiet, dignified occupation was 1,000 times more frightening than any brutal invasion could ever be. On the Cathali homeworld, Ambassador Varmoth watched the broadcast, tears streaming down his face. "They could burn it all to the ground," he whispered to his staff. "They could erase the Zyrthian Empire from history, and not one of us could lift a finger to stop them. But they aren't. They are choosing mercy." "But why?" one of the Zyrthian observers asked, completely stunned. "After everything our people did to them?" Varmoth, the old historian, watched the human delegation on the view screen and answered, his voice thick with awe. "Because that, my friend, is what it means to be human. They refuse to be defined by their pain. They're defined by their choices. And in their moment of absolute power, they chose mercy." He just shook his head, a sense of wonder on his ancient face. The Zyrthians made a fatal mistake. They targeted the one woman who embodied humanity's deepest compassion, General Amara Chen. And in doing so, they forced a young, underestimated species to prove to the entire galaxy that their mercy wasn't some kind of weakness. It was their most profound strength. Miles and miles away, back on Earth, in a heavily secured, sterile white room, Amara's eyes slowly fluttered open. She felt impossibly delicate, as if her body were made of spun sugar. A dull, throbbing ache pulsed from her chest, right where the enemy's energy blast had ripped through her. But she was alive. "James," she whispered. Her first thought, a mother's instinct, was for her son. A nurse quickly came to her side, softly explaining everything that had transpired. The war, the impossibly quick victory, the fleet's calm, deliberate advance into enemy territory. Amara closed her eyes as tears streamed down her temples, but they weren't tears of pride. They were tears of immense sadness. "All of that violence," she murmured. "All that destruction. I spent my entire life trying to stop this from happening." The nurse's voice was gentle. "Ma'am, Admiral Chen was crystal clear in his orders. Absolutely no civilian targets, no collateral damage. They're moving with surgical precision." Amara gave a faint nod. Yes, that sounds like my boy. He always was a good listener." She relaxed back into the pillows, her mind a whirlwind of the peace she'd championed, the war that had destroyed it, and the terrifyingly uncertain future that waited for everyone. At that very same moment, deep in the heart of the crumbling Zyrthian Empire, the High Archon Velketh was a prisoner in his own palace. The supreme ruler who had ordered the assassination was now a fugitive, cowering in his throne room. His once invincible fleet was now a collection of ghosts. His government was shattered, and his own people were howling for his blood. Suddenly, a calm voice cut through the thick, terrified silence. "High Archon Velketh," James Chen said, his voice quiet but echoing with undeniable authority. "On behalf of the United Earth government, and in accordance with galactic law, you are under arrest. The charges are crimes against peace, crimes against humanity, and the attempted assassination of a diplomatic envoy. It's time to face the consequences. Justice has arrived." Velketh could only stare at the young human standing before him. He was composed, radiating power, with eyes that burned with a cold, disciplined rage. This was the son of the woman he had tried to have murdered. "You could just kill me right here," Velketh spat, trying to find some leverage. "No one would blame you. No one would even try to stop you." "You're right," James replied, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "I could. And trust me, for every single second since you laid a hand on my mother, I've imagined doing just that in about 1,000 different ways." He took one slow step forward. "But my mother didn't raise a monster. We are not you. You're going to stand trial, and the entire galaxy is going to watch." Human soldiers moved in, taking the trembling, defeated Velketh into custody. The fighting was over. But the next chapter, the part that would define everything, was just getting started. The trial of High Archon Velketh was broadcast on every channel to every planet, moon, and lonely space station in the known galaxy. Trillions of beings watched as the once mighty emperor was led before an interspecies tribunal. He wasn't wearing his ornate robes, but a plain gray prison jumpsuit. His pale blue skin looked almost translucent under the harsh courtroom lights. His eyes, once filled with arrogant fire, were now just empty pits of despair. Admiral James Chen observed from the gallery. He had fulfilled his duty. He had brought the architect of this chaos to justice. Now it was in the hands of the law. The case against Velketh was a mountain of undeniable proof. Audio logs of him ordering the attack, sworn testimony from his own former lieutenants, hard data proving that General Chen was never a threat and that the entire war was based on a lie. Velketh attempted a defense, rambling about a so-called natural order and the divine right of ancient races to dominate the younger ones. He spoke of destiny and power, but the court was unmoved. After his speech, he was found guilty on all counts. But he wasn't sentenced to death. Humanity had made a specific request to have that option removed. His punishment was far more fitting: life imprisonment on a desolate prison moon. He would spend eternity alone with his thoughts, forced to watch the galaxy evolve in all the ways he fought to prevent. Some argued it was too lenient. But those who understood Velketh knew that for a being so obsessed with his own legacy, to be utterly forgotten was a punishment far worse than death. With the trial over, a massive question hung in the air: what happens now? The old Galactic Treaty was in tatters, the balance of power was completely shattered, and a new order had to be built from the wreckage. 3 months after the verdict, a grand assembly was convened on Concordia Prime. The station, now fully repaired, featured a new memorial in its great hall, marking the very spot where General Chen had been struck down. Representatives from every known species began to fill the chamber. It wasn't just the old powerful empires this time. Smaller, often overlooked species, races who had never been given a voice before, were present. Humanity sent 2 delegates: Admiral James Chen, his crisp military uniform serving as a quiet reminder of the power that had just pulled the galaxy back from the abyss. And next to him, still recovering in a hover chair, was his mother, General Amara Chen. The instant she appeared in the hall, a profound silence fell over the massive assembly. This was the woman who had been shot. The woman whose attempted murder sparked a war, and whose survival now served as the symbol for a new era of peace. Amara looked older, the trauma visible in the lines on her face, but her eyes were as sharp, as kind, and as full of hope as they had ever been. Her son gently maneuvered her hover chair to the speaker's platform. She paused for a long moment, her gaze sweeping across the sea of alien faces, countless beings from countless worlds, all of them watching her. "I died on this spot," she said, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the hall. "For several minutes my heart was silent. I was gone." She reached out and lightly touched the memorial beside her. "When I woke up, they told me what had transpired. They told me about the war, the swiftness of the victory, and the awesome power my son wielded. And then—" She paused, letting the silence amplify her next words. "They told me about the mercy he had shown." Her eyes moved from one delegate to the next, making contact. My son commanded a force that could have reduced the entire Zyrathian Empire to dust and starlight, and not a single person in this room could have stopped him. Honestly, very few would have even blamed him. I'm his mother, and they had just tried to assassinate me. Behind her, James stood like a statue, his face unreadable. But, she went on, he chose another way. He chose to wage war only against those who were guilty, and he chose to shield the millions of innocent people who had no part in their leader's crime. He chose mercy at the very moment when revenge would have been the easiest path. Amara's voice gained strength, ringing with conviction. That decision, that is the core of what it is to be human. It's not our technology or our warships. It is our capacity to choose. We can be monsters. We can be destroyers. The galaxy has now witnessed what we are capable of when we are threatened. She let that thought sink into the quiet hall. But we can also be builders. We can be healers. We can be allies. That is the other half of our nature, and that is the path we are choosing to walk today. She gestured to the incredible diversity of life gathered around her. The old Pax Galactica is finished. It was a peace maintained by fear, fear of the powerful, fear of each other, fear of disrupting a delicate status quo. That fear kept us isolated as much as it prevented conflict. She held out a hand and James took it, helping her stand just a bit straighter. Today, I propose something different. Not another treaty built on fear, but a covenant of equals. Every species, regardless of its size or age, will have a voice. Every species will have a hand in shaping the future we must all share. She then turned her gaze to the new delegation from the Zyrathian Empire. These were the new leaders who had risen after Velketh's fall. Even those who have wronged us will have a seat at this new table, because nursing old grievances only plants the seeds for future wars. I could despise your entire species for the actions of one man, but what good would that do? It would only poison my own soul, and it would not change a single moment of the past. The Zyrathian diplomats bowed their heads, their faces a mix of shame and profound relief. Amara continued, "This new covenant will be built on simple principles. No species will attack another without just cause. No species will conquer or oppress another. We will resolve our disputes with diplomacy, and failing that, with fair and impartial justice." A small smile touched her lips. And if anyone decides to break these rules, if anyone thinks conquest is a good idea, well, they might want to remember that humanity is watching, and we will be ready. Her smile faded. Look, we're not trying to be the galaxy's police force. We don't want anyone to fear us. We want to be partners, but we will never, ever stand by and let what happened to me happen to another soul. That is our promise. That is our solemn vow. The entire hall fell silent, 1,000 worlds holding their breath. Then a single person started clapping, and the sound swept through the assembly like a wildfire. It swelled into a thunderous roar of approval, an absolute explosion of hope from 1,000 different planets. The Covenant of Equals was officially signed that day. Every major power added their name to the document, and every smaller civilization was personally invited to join. For the first time in the galaxy's entire recorded history, there was a real union. A true fellowship of all peoples, and in the years that followed, everything began to get better. All across the galaxy, the deep scars left by a brutal but thankfully brief war finally started to heal. Trade routes were buzzing with life again, and knowledge was shared freely between star systems. Problems that once seemed impossible to solve were now being tackled by the combined efforts of hundreds of species, all thinking and working as one. After she made a full recovery, General Amara Chen went right back to her diplomatic work, traveling from world to strengthen the bonds of the new covenant. Her son, James, eventually decided to hang up his military uniform for good. He moved into public administration, using his strategic genius to build new worlds instead of breaking old ones. But humanity never got rid of its shadow fleets. The secret superweapons were never shut down. Each new generation was taught how to maintain them, a serious responsibility passed down through the centuries. Peace was a wonderful thing, but humans had learned the hard way just how easily it could shatter. On the 10th anniversary of the Covenant, they held a celebration on Concordia Prime, though this time it was a smaller, more intimate gathering. It was more like a reunion for the delegates who had become good friends over the years, all of them coming together to celebrate the incredible future they had built. General Chen, now 73 years old but still as sharp as a tack, was standing in the memorial garden that had been planted on the exact spot where she had almost died. The garden itself was a work of art, blooming with plants from every known planet, a living, breathing symbol of their unity. James, whose own hair was now streaked with gray, stood right by her side. All around them, beings from dozens of different species chatted and laughed without a hint of fear, their many voices creating a beautiful symphony of sound. It was then that a small family started walking toward them, their steps a little shy and uncertain. They were Zarathian, a mother, a father, and their two little kids, seeing Concordia Prime for the very first time. The youngest, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5 years old, was clutching a single flower in her tiny blue hand. She shuffled nervously toward General Chen as her parents watched from a distance, looking a bit anxious. Are you the lady from the stories?" the little girl whispered. Amara knelt down, her old knees groaning a bit. "And what stories would those be, little one?" The girl's voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper. "My grandma tells them. She says you were the one who taught the whole galaxy how to be kind again." Amara looked into the child's innocent eyes and felt her own eyes start to water. "I did my best," she said gently. "We all did together." The little girl held out the flower. "This is for you, to say thank you." She glanced back at her parents, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. "And to say we're sorry for what that mean man did to you." Amara carefully took the flower. It was a beautiful, delicate thing, a swirl of purple and white from the Zarathian homeworld. It was an apology from a child who had done absolutely nothing wrong. "Thank you," Amara said, her voice choked with emotion. "It's absolutely beautiful." The little girl's face lit up with a proud smile before she ran back to her parents. The couple gave General Chen a deep, respectful bow and then melted back into the crowd. James gently helped his mother stand up. "Do you really think it will last?" he asked in a low voice. "This peace we've made." Amara watched the Zarathian family disappear behind a grove of glowing trees, the little girl now holding her mother's hand and excitedly pointing at all the strange new plants. "Maybe," she replied, "and maybe not. Peace isn't a statue you build once and just expect to stand forever. It takes work. Every single day, every new generation has to wake up and make that same choice." She looked up at the stars glittering through the garden's clear dome. "But that's what we humans have always done, right? We keep trying. We never give up building. It's our choice," she murmured, "to be better than we have to be." Her gaze fell on her son, the soldier who had the power to destroy galaxies, but chose to show mercy instead. "And if the peace ever shatters," James added, as if reading her mind, "we'll be there to pick up the pieces." A small smile touched Amara's lips as she squeezed his hand. "We always are." Around them, the universe kept turning, filled with people living their lives, creating, dreaming, fighting, and forgiving. It would never be perfect, and there would always be conflict, but for the first time, everyone was growing in the same direction, together. Deep in the official records of every world and woven into the lessons taught to every child a small change was made to humanity's entry in the Galactic database. The label that had defined them for 900 years, primitive species, protected status, was deleted. In its place were 4 simple words: humanity, approach with respect. The change was small, almost unnoticeable, but what it represented was massive. General Amara Chen gently pressed the little purple flower into the rich soil of the memorial garden, planting another piece of life in a place that had once been marked only by death. "Don't ever forget who we are," she whispered, remembering the words she'd spoken a decade ago. And after all this time, the rest of the galaxy was finally beginning to understand. They were human. They held the power for both terrifying destruction and endless compassion. They were fierce protectors and gentle healers, builders of wonders and guardians of the peace. They were a living contradiction, and every single morning they chose which part of themselves they would show the universe. That was their strength. That was the legacy they would leave for everyone who came after them. The new covenant would hold, not because of powerful warships or threats, but because it was built on a promise that was renewed every day by trillions of people choosing to be better, to stand together, and to learn from the scars of their past. And if the day ever came when that promise was broken, when a shadow once again fell across the stars, humanity would be ready, a silent guardian, forever watching and always prepared. But their greatest hope, their constant prayer, was that those weapons would never have to be used again. And that, more than anything else, was what it truly meant to be human.